Mercedes could lose the entire 2026 season before the first race even starts. Not because they are slow, not because Red Bull built a monster, but because the FIA may have rejected the fuel their entire engine was designed around. And we are not talking about a small adjustment. We are talking about a reported loss of up to 15 horsepower. Injection pressures above 500 bar. Fuel literally vaporizing inside the pump. And an engine concept that might not survive without that exact Petronas blend. If the homologation stands, Mercedes does not just lose performance. They lose their foundation. And here is the part almost nobody is explaining. If this fuel cannot be approved, Mercedes cannot simply switch to another supplier overnight. Customer teams suffer. Engine maps change. Combustion stability drops. Reliability risks explode. This is not a delay. It is a potential collapse of an entire technical philosophy. And by the end of this video, you will understand why this could redefine the balance of power for years. Subscribe now, because what comes next is bigger than anyone expected. This did not start with a public announcement. It started quietly. Inside Brixworth. Behind closed doors. Because when you design a brand new power unit for a regulation reset as radical as 2026, you do not design the engine first. You design the chemistry. And then you build everything around it. Mercedes and Petronas have worked together for more than a decade. Multiple championships. Complete technical integration. This is not a normal supplier relationship. This is structural. The fuel characteristics influence combustion chamber geometry, injection strategy, turbo response, thermal management. Even the electrical deployment strategy is calculated around combustion efficiency targets. Change the fuel, and you destabilize the entire ecosystem. And here is where things become uncomfortable. The 2026 regulations forced all fuel suppliers to move to 100% sustainable blends. No fossil components. Strict bio-origin verification. Tight chemical fingerprints registered with the FIA. Once homologated, the window for modification becomes extremely narrow. You are locked in. And Mercedes reportedly pushed the envelope. Because to recover the power lost from reduced fuel flow limits, engineers have only two options. Increase combustion efficiency. Or increase injection pressure. Mercedes appears to have chosen both. Extreme pressure. Aggressive atomization. Highly optimized burn speed. That demands a very specific octane behavior. Very specific volatility curves. Very specific stability under compression. But sustainable fuels do not behave like traditional race fuel. They react differently under suction. They vaporize differently at temperature. They respond differently to rapid pressure changes. And when you push above 500 bar of injection pressure, even microscopic instability becomes catastrophic. This is where cavitation enters the picture. And this is not theory. It is physics. If the fuel begins to vaporize before reaching the injector, vapor bubbles form inside the high-pressure pump. When those bubbles collapse, they do not disappear gently. They implode. Violently. The implosion creates micro shockwaves. Those shockwaves erode the internal metal surfaces. Not over seasons. Over hours. And once that process starts, reliability becomes a ticking clock. Now imagine you are Mercedes. You discover instability during testing. You attempt to correct it with stabilizing additives. You modify the chemical composition slightly. You submit the updated blend for FIA homologation. And then, it gets rejected. Not because it is slow, but because it does not meet sustainability purity thresholds. Or exceeds additive limits. That is not a performance issue. That is a regulatory wall. And here is the psychological pressure point. If the FIA rejects Spec B, Mercedes must revert to Spec A. Spec A is less powerful, less stable, more prone to cavitation. Which means the engine must run conservative maps. Lower ignition advance. Reduced peak pressure. That costs horsepower. Potentially double-digit horsepower. And in modern Formula 1, double-digit horsepower is the difference between leading and chasing. But the real danger is not raw power. It is detuning. Because once you detune for reliability, you redesign your philosophy around protection instead of aggression. Instead of attacking the new era, you survive it. And survival does not win championships. And remember something critical. Customer teams like McLaren and Williams depend on that same power unit architecture. They cannot independently redesign fuel systems overnight. If Mercedes struggles, they struggle. Which increases pressure. Which increases scrutiny. Which increases political tension inside the paddock. But here is the detail that changes the entire narrative. The 2026 power unit will rely far more on electrical deployment than before. That means the internal combustion engine must operate at peak efficiency to maintain battery balance. If combustion stability drops because of fuel compromise, electrical strategy suffers too. So this is not just an engine issue. It is a total power unit equilibrium issue. And this is why this situation feels bigger than a simple homologation problem. Because if Mercedes miscalculated the volatility window of the Petronas blend, then the entire engine architecture may have been optimized around an unstable chemical foundation. That is not a patch fix. That is structural reconsideration. And structural reconsideration takes time. Time that disappears quickly when a regulation reset approaches. But we are not at the most dangerous part yet. Because what happens if the FIA decision is final, and competitors already solved this months ago? If the FIA decision is final, and competitors already solved this months ago, then Mercedes is not fighting a temporary setback. They are fighting a head start they do not have. Because in a regulation reset, timing is everything. You do not just need a good engine. You need a stable engine early. You need thousands of kilometers of clean data. You need correlation between dyno, simulator, and track. If your fuel is unstable, your data becomes unreliable. If your data is unreliable, your development path becomes uncertain. And uncertainty in Formula One is expensive. Now imagine Red Bull, working quietly with Ford, backed by ExxonMobil. No noise. No public drama. Reports suggest strong energy density. Stable combustion. Confidence. And confidence is usually the result of solved problems. Ferrari appears calm as well. Shell's blend reportedly passed internal validation smoothly. No cavitation whispers. No emergency recalibrations. And that matters more than people realize. Because stability allows aggression. If you trust your fuel, you can push compression. You can push ignition timing. You can push thermal limits. Mercedes right now might be doing the opposite. Protecting. Limiting. Containing risk. But here is the deeper layer most people are missing. The 2026 power units will operate under a new balance between combustion and electrical deployment. Almost 50% of total output will rely on electric energy. That sounds like it reduces dependence on fuel. It does not. It increases the need for combustion efficiency stability. Because the internal combustion engine must recharge the battery efficiently during specific load phases. If knock risk forces conservative ignition maps, energy recovery strategy becomes compromised. Which means electrical deployment later in the lap becomes weaker. Which means straight line performance suffers. Not just once. Every lap. This is a chain reaction. Fuel instability affects combustion. Combustion affects thermal management. Thermal management affects hybrid balance. Hybrid balance affects race pace. And race pace defines championships. Now add another uncomfortable detail. Once fuel is homologated, development freedom is almost frozen. You cannot redesign chemical composition mid-season freely. You cannot experiment every race weekend. You are locked into a specification window approved by the FIA. So if Mercedes' optimal blend sits outside that window, they face a strategic compromise for years. Not weeks. Years. And this connects to something even more controversial. There have been quiet rumors about Mercedes exploring highly aggressive combustion geometries. Advanced piston crown shapes. Very tight tolerances. Design solutions that maximize efficiency within gray regulatory areas. But those designs only work with very specific detonation resistance characteristics. Change the octane curve slightly, and the entire advantage disappears. Or worse, becomes a reliability liability. So now ask yourself this. Did Mercedes design an engine around the assumption that Petronas would deliver a chemically superior blend that pushed the limits of legality? And if that blend is now rejected, what remains of the advantage? Because here is the brutal truth. If you must redesign around a weaker fuel, you either accept less power, or you redesign hardware. Redesigning hardware in a cost-capped, tightly frozen regulation era is slow. Painfully slow. And while you redesign, others optimize. But there is one more dimension that makes this even more dangerous. Perception. Formula One is not just engineering. It is psychology. If customer teams begin to doubt the stability of Mercedes' power, internal pressure increases. Political tension grows. Confidence erodes. And confidence loss spreads faster than technical failure. And here is the question that could define the new era. Is this just early development turbulence? Or is this the first visible crack in a project that was built on a chemical assumption that does not survive FIA scrutiny? Because if it is the second, then Mercedes is not entering 2026 as the hunter. They are entering it already defending. And in a reset this big, starting on the defensive can define the balance of power for the next decade. There is one final layer to this story. And it might be the most dangerous one of all. Because when a team builds a power unit for a regulation reset this massive, they do not aim to be competitive. They aim to dominate, to lock in an advantage that lasts years. Mercedes has done it before. They understand how to read a new rulebook. They understand how to exploit gray areas. But that strategy only works when every pillar of the project is solid. Engine, hybrid, fuel, regulatory interpretation. Right now, at least one of those pillars looks unstable. And instability at this stage does not just slow development. It forces compromise decisions that echo through the entire car. If combustion temperatures rise unpredictably, cooling requirements increase. If cooling increases, side pod geometry changes. If side pod geometry changes, aerodynamic philosophy shifts. If aerodynamic philosophy shifts, the entire concept must be recalibrated in the wind tunnel. You see how quickly this escalates. This is no longer just about horsepower. It is about architecture. And here is where the political dimension quietly enters the room. The FIA does not simply evaluate performance. They evaluate compliance, sustainability metrics, chemical traceability, additive composition. If a fuel blend is even marginally outside the permitted bio-component window, rejection is mandatory. There is no flexibility. Because 2026 is supposed to represent a sustainability milestone for the sport, the FIA cannot afford exceptions. So if Mercedes believed their chemical innovation would be interpreted generously, and that assumption proves wrong, then the miscalculation is not mechanical. It is strategic. And that is what makes this situation feel heavier than a normal pre-season issue. Because performance problems can be optimized. Reliability problems can be engineered out. But a philosophical misread of regulatory tolerance is much harder to fix. Now think about the timeline. Homologation windows close early. Engine specifications become restricted. Fuel development freezes into narrow corridors. If Mercedes needs to redesign piston geometry, recalibrate injection systems, or modify combustion chamber characteristics to suit a weaker blend, they are fighting the clock under cost cap pressure. Every hour on the dyno costs development resources elsewhere. Every adjustment risks correlation issues. And while they adjust, competitors collect clean mileage, clean data, clean confidence. But there is an even sharper edge to this story. Customer perception influences future alliances. If McLaren or Williams begin to fear long-term instability, future supply negotiations become tense. Trust becomes conditional. And in the new engine era, manufacturers need strong partners to justify investment. This means the fuel issue is not just a technical problem. It is a reputational risk. And here is the silent threat hiding behind everything. If Mercedes enters the first race of 2026 running conservative engine maps to protect fuel pumps and prevent knock, their true potential remains hidden. Rivals gain psychological advantage. Momentum builds elsewhere. In a regulation reset, the first narrative often becomes the lasting narrative. The team that looks strongest early becomes the reference point. Sponsors react. Media framing solidifies. Driver confidence shifts. So the real battle might not be fought on track first. It might be fought in laboratories, in homologation documents, in chemical composition charts submitted to the FIA. And here is the uncomfortable possibility that ties everything together. If Mercedes designed an ultra-aggressive combustion concept expecting Petronas to deliver a uniquely optimized sustainable blend, and that blend cannot pass strict regulatory scrutiny, then the engine is no longer optimized. It is exposed. Which leads to the final question that defines this entire story. Did Mercedes push innovation further than the regulations could tolerate? Or did the FIA draw a harder line than expected? Because whichever answer is true, it will decide whether Mercedes begins the new era as the hunter, or as the team desperately trying to recover ground they never expected to lose.